Well, welcome. We have a packed house. I was talking to Steve, and I think it literally had to turn people away. So I just want to say, first of all, thanks for showing up, for your obvious commitment to education. And today's going to be, I think, it's going to be an absolutely wonderful day. My name's Mike Donnelly. My day job is I'm the regional president for Wells Fargo here in Atlanta. Um, but I'm also serve on Steve's board of the Georgia Partnership and will be the next board chair. So I want to make a couple of comments and then get Steve up here to get our day started. First, I want to thank big shout out goes to AT&T for their continued support of all of the 2018 critical issues forums. These things, right? They take money, they take resources, and we really want to thank AT&T for stepping up. Statewide elections, they're on everybody's mind. Turn on the TV, you probably see a couple of ads, may be proud of or not very proud of, but that's a comment for a different conversation. Um, but it really has a lot of our attention, right? The gubernatorial election. Um, but but this election is not the only important election that's coming up. For a lot of voters, especially many of us who have school-aged children, I have two kids still in Fulton County schools and one that's moved on, as well as others that spend their day and are passionate about education. Um, One election that will gather, as it should, a lot of attention is the state school superintendent. We shouldn't underestimate this position. The superintendent leads the Georgia Department of Education, which oversees the state's K through 12 public education system with its $10 billion with a B budget and its 1.8 million students. It is truly significant. The position involves instituting policies and managing operations of the State Board of Education. And think about it this way. I know I do. Children, if they are truly our most important responsibility, and truly the future of our state, and for many of us, important to how we'll finish out the rest of our lives, there could be nothing that could be more important that we would spend our time on. And again, I know I'm preaching to the choir because you're all here today to learn more. So today, you're going to hear from the candidates for the state office as well as a panel of stakeholders as they stress their priorities, ranging from ensuring our kids are safe to supporting our teachers as they work to help our students be successful for college and for career, to providing rigorous preparation for our students that lead them to being a part of a skilled workforce, ensuring future economic competitiveness. And now I've got the privilege of calling up the president of Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education, who's going to provide a report out on the partnership, Steve Dolinger.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon. Come on, come on. Good afternoon. Thank you, thank you. I learned that trick from Chris Clark. I see him do those a lot when he's making his presentations with the chamber, and it works. It's good at people's attention. Thank you, Mike. Part of the strength of the Georgia Partnership is our leadership on our board, and to have business leaders like Mike in succession it keeps us focused and on course. So we really appreciate that. I'm going to take you through the packet real quickly. Then I'll give you a quick overview of the program, and then we'll get right into it. The agenda we'll come back to in just a minute, so you can set that aside. Mike already mentioned the support from AT&T, great funders, and we appreciate them realizing that this is an important event when we have several of these critical issue forums during the year. Behind that are bios for our speakers and our panel members. If you've been to our critical issue forums before, we want you to be able to read this at your leisure, and we don't take time then as we go through the program. We'll connect you to the faces of the names, but we go through that pretty quickly, so we won't take time to do the introductions as we go through. The next piece is part of our EdQuest Georgia work. Our board, speaking of great leadership, told us that after Race to the Top, where we had 4 statewide goals, we addressed those pretty well. What's next? Where do we go next in Georgia? not just the business leaders, but education, organization leaders, legislators need to have some kind of a blueprint to help them look at what's going to be next in Georgia. So we had a wonderful grant from the Guazetta Foundation, and over 2 years worth of work, Dr. Dana Rickman on our staff took point on that work and came up with the areas that high-performing states and countries have in common, the policy work. And that's this document. If you're a data geek and like research, there's hundreds of pages that you can get on our website, but this distills it down into one page. There are 7 buckets, and it's kind of a stoplight arrangement. If it's green, don't mess it up. It's working pretty well. If it's yellow, it may need more attention, more funding, more connecting. If it's red, those are the areas that we really need to focus on policy in our state. There's a packet outside on the table you may have seen. If you didn't see it, there's another page for each of the 7, which gives you just a little bit more data. But we're very proud of this work. We wanted it to be, of course, a project of ours, but we wanted folks like you to take this and use it as you can with your organizations. So we took time. We started slowly, as we said, so we could pick up speed later. We could run later with this project. We had a steering committee, an advisory committee. Then for each of these areas, we had working groups across the state that would give us feedback and say, oh, you're missing this part, or nope, you don't need that anymore. So it'd be something that people across all sectors and stakeholders could use. And we heard from the Georgia PTA today that they were applying for a grant and used the data and research in here. They said just fit and supported what they wanted to do. Many of your organizations, you could look and see, oh, well, we work on number 2 and 3. So hopefully this will give you a research base to the work that you're doing, but you'll hear us refer to this some more today. And if you'd like to get the packet on your way out, please do. The next is the executive summary for the product of another big body of work. I'll get into just a little bit more, and it's going to be the first part of our program this afternoon, Accelerating the Pace, the Future of Education in the American South. We don't have hard copies. We do have a few of these that we have in our office that we try to share among ourselves, but you can download this off our website and be able to read all of that research. It's very compelling and very enlightening. We'll get into some more of that in just a few minutes. Then we thought we'd give you this next piece as a tool. It does get a little confusing in the education policy space and who are the players. So we've given you several organizations, some boards, and some positions in this education policy arena that might help you navigate that and know, kind of what's happening and where. The next page is a list of our Education Policy Fellows class for this year. I'm very proud of this program. Obviously, we started a decade ago. Weren't really sure if there was enough interest in having a group of people coming together every year to learn more about education policy. But like the partnership, this group is made up of business, government, education, organizational leaders. And it's become so popular now that we get a lot of applicants every year and then distill it down to some hard choices to make for our class. What's heartening for me is that any meeting we go to at the Capitol or other association meetings, there are always some of our education policy alums there from our past classes. So just so you can see what might be here today, would our education policy fellows in this year's class and our alumni please stand? See what I mean? Let's give them a round of applause. These people understand ed policy and can try to make a difference. So that's why you see them out and about, because if they weren't passionate before, they are now, but they're also knowledgeable about how to work the game. Next are a couple of articles. Robert Gaines, our communication director back in the back, does a good job of connecting us with reporters. We have our annual media symposium every January where we roll out our top 10 issues to watch. But during the year, we like to be resources. Sometimes we get quoted, sometimes we're not, but we like to be able to be available to give information. The James Magazine asked us to do an article just about every quarter in their publication. The first one is one by Dr. Dana Rickman, as you can see, talking about some of the issues and what's on people's mind. The second is an article we wrote and provided to the AJC, but Maureen Downey, who's here today, used that in her blog, Get Schooled, last week. So you may have seen that, but if not, here's a hard copy. Then the yellow paper there If you'd like to be on our distribution list so that when we put out invitations to events like this, or we have some new piece of research or an article, you could be on that mailing list. So just fill this out and leave it at the table on your way out. Then if you'd like to work with some of your social media, you can see there it would be hashtag GPEE Forum for today. So if you want to start cranking those, it gives you a legitimate reason to use your phones. A couple of other little announcements here. At the center of your table, there are instructions for a polling that we're going to be doing in a few minutes. It's poll everywhere. Robert will come up and walk you through that, but you may want to start looking at those instructions so you'll be prepared to follow that. And as Mike said, the partnership does a lot of work, and your help in funding that work, along with other foundations and corporations, keeps us moving. So there's an envelope there if you'd like to make a donation. We would certainly appreciate it. Please understand that today's program is being taped, as you can see in the back. That video will be available on our website sometime early next week. So if you have some friends who were not able to get in today, Mike's right, it was a max crowd. We had to cut off the registrations. Or if you want to go back and see some of the questions and answers to our candidates, you can do that. Look at the video sometime next week. Plus the slides, you're going to see a lot of slides and data pieces that Alan will be doing in a few minutes. They'll be going quickly. Don't get stressed about having to take notes. Those slides are on our website right now, so you can go to those as soon as you would like. I mentioned the EdQuest packets are out on the table. There's some other pieces of information out there you may want to pick up if you didn't see it when you came in. There's copies. I mentioned our top 10 issues to watch. We, in fact, are working on the top 10 issues to watch for next year and have an advisory committee, which many of you have agreed so generously to give us your time in a couple of weeks to start thinking through what the Big 10 would be for next year. There's also the new 5th edition of our Economics of Education, where we talk about that whole birth to work pipeline and talk about data elements. We use that as we go across Georgia when we're invited to go into communities and help them with their local strategic planning. We're also doing what we call a roadshow, going across the state in different communities to present that data. Metro Atlanta Chamber hosted the first one here. It was a sold-out crowd for their facility. We were down in Macon. The Chamber and the university there hosted us, sold-out crowd there. We'll be going to Brunswick and Tifton and some other places soon. So if you're traveling around or from other places, you may want to join us. Speaking of joining us, we have a group that came in today. They may be the ones that came the furthest in Georgia. We have some folks that came from North Carolina and D.C., but over here at this table, right here, are folks from the Worth County Chamber, Sylvester Worth County. They have been friends of ours. We've been working with them for a couple of years. This is their Chamber's Education Committee, and as they say, they understand this whole birth to work pipelines. Let's give Worth County a round of applause for a long journey. Okay, back to our agenda. I mentioned the Accelerating the Pace work. We are the facilitating, convening organization for several states across the South. We'll talk about which those states are in a few minutes. But we worked together with them, had a Gates funding project to convene these states. Diane Hopkins, our executive vice president, ran point on that for us for 2 years. A lot of work, you can imagine, convening organizations like ours, doing research, focus groups, polling across the South, but came up with some issues that we thought we could all focus upon that all dealt with equity in education. And as we peeled that back, it was equity in funding, equity in teacher quality, equity and opportunity for children. So that was part of the focus of a lot of work that also, of course, dovetails into our EdQuest research. So we want to provide that with you today. We, in that process, realized that even with Diane's leadership and working with the other states, we need someone else to help us facilitate that. And Alan Richard is here today. We contracted with him. He's a professional writer. We knew him way back when he was with SREB, the Southern Region Education Board here in Atlanta. So he worked with us in doing the final writing and publishing and distribution of that work. So he will be able to help us through that in just a few minutes. You can see that he'll be coming up in a minute. Robert Gaines will come up after him and walk you through the Poll Everywhere piece, which will populate your ideas of what the most important issues are in education. Our two candidates are here. That will be the interview that you're here for. And you see we have a strong panel. Again, like the partnership, business, education leaders, we want to have that kind of voice. And of course, we have some that also wearing other hats, like as a parent and not just a business leader. Then we'll get into the Q&A piece. We'll ask you to do the question and answer so that we can be efficient with our time. Please don't get into your own political speeches and don't get into advertising for your organization. We'll be glad for you to give your name and organization, but be focused and succinct with your questions so that the answers can be quick and we can get more questions from the audience as we go through. Then Mike will come back and wrap things up. So with that, I will now ask Alan to come up, give us this overview of this important work we did on accelerating the pace, and then after that, we will get into our panel. Alan, thank you.
Hi, everyone. We're overwhelmed by the size of the audience today. Thanks for being interested in education in Georgia, so we're glad you're here. As Steve said, my slides that I'm about to show you are now available on the Georgia Partnerships website, which is gpee.org. So, because I'm going to be moving fast. First, you'll hear me cite today the EdQuest report, which Steve just told you about. It's sort of a blueprint for the future of education in Georgia. And there's an entire website of information available at edquestga.org. My main purpose, though, is to talk about another report called Accelerating the Pace, which Steve also just mentioned. Our partners on this report were together known as the Columbia Group. For this regional blueprint for improving education, we teamed with like-minded organizations. You see the slide there. Those are the members of the Columbia Group. It's just an informal network of education policy organizations. But before we get into the Accelerating the Pace report, the project included something called the Education Poll of the South. We wanted to know how voters in Georgia and the other southern states saw the quality of education in their states and to see if they saw the need for improvements. So who did we poll in the Education Poll of the South? 2,200 voters across the region, from Louisiana to Georgia up to West Virginia. Those polled are representative largely of each state's registered voters by gender, race, ethnicity, political view, locale, and these are statistically valid results. More people participated in this survey than do in most presidential race polls. So let's move into some key findings. Who did we poll? What were their political views? 43% of Southern voters who we surveyed consider themselves somewhat or very conservative. About a third called themselves moderate, and less than a quarter said somewhat or very liberal. So our first question was, how do you feel about the quality of your public schools in recent years? Southerners, 39% of them said they'd stayed about the same. Schools had stayed about the same in recent years. Slightly fewer in Georgia. And actually, the largest group in Georgia said that in recent years, schools have gotten worse. But the point is, a big chunk of folks see not a lot of movement in terms of improvement in education. Fewer than 1 in 5, in fact, thought schools were improving. So the next question, do Georgians recognize differences in the quality of education across the state and the region? In other words, do some children get a good education and others don't? This gets at the question of equity and opportunity. Well, about 3 out of 4 voters in the South and in Georgia recognize that students don't have the same opportunities. 74% in the region, 73% in Georgia. Before we get to the next one, I wanted to do a little drum roll. So for this next question, which is basically, do you think we should do something about those differences in the quality of education? I think a lot of advocates who we were meeting with said, oh, well, maybe we'll get a slight majority of people who will feel that way. The response was overwhelming. 85% of voters in the South strongly or somewhat support state action to improve equity in education. 79% did in Georgia. I don't know anything that 85 and 79% of voters these days agree on, even in Georgia, but they agree on this. So the next question was, would you support changing your state's school funding system to address these differences? Very strong interest in this. 83% of Southern voters said they would, 78% in Georgia. Now, this next question, by asking this question, the Georgia Partnership is not necessarily endorsing a tax increase, just so you know. But if necessary, we ask voters, would you pay more in taxes to support improving education? A majority in the South and fully 2/3 in Georgia said they would support state tax increases. What about local taxes? Very much the same. 62% of voters in Georgia said they would support a local tax increase, if necessary, to improve schools. Now, a more popular option, as you might imagine, is the next one. Should we prioritize education more than we currently do in the state budget? Stronger support for that, of course. 71% in the South, 77% of registered voters in Georgia agreed. So let's look at some additional findings from Georgia. What was the top overall issue on voters' minds in the state? Well, not surprisingly, the first one, the most common answer was the economy and jobs. 45% made that their first choice. But right behind it, second highest, improving K through 12 education. 40% of respondents listed that first. And then right behind that, improving higher education. And those education choices were polled higher than improving infrastructure, cutting government spending, or even lowering taxes. Very interesting. So which specific priorities in K-12 education do voters want state and local officials to address? The top answer in Georgia, 57%, said having effective teachers in the classroom. Certainly where the rubber meets the road. Second most popular answer just behind that, 56%, helping high school students prepare for the real world, teaching them life skills that they can use in their work and in their lives. And the third most popular was making sure all children have an equal opportunity for a good education, no matter their circumstance. This was chosen over many, many other issues in education. Now let's move to the Accelerating the Pace report, and I'll just give you a brief overview. I had the opportunity, thanks to the Columbia Group organizations, to travel across 6 states to meet with the Columbia Group organizations and key stakeholders in education in each state. We had a business leaders roundtable here in Georgia, and elsewhere I met with educators, policy advocates, state officials, parents, students, and we also had focus groups of voters in multiple states. And what we found was really strong consensus on key issues, the key priorities in education that we should focus on. And actually much agreement about the specific steps that we need to take to make improvements. It was interesting to us how many of the same themes dovetailed with the Georgia Partnership's EdQuest report. So there were 4 main priorities that we identified to include in Accelerating the Pace. And you see them here on your screen, and I'm going to go through each one right now. So first, more talent in our classrooms and principals' offices, and better support for our educators. So this involves improvement in teacher recruitment, teacher and principal preparation. We highlight the U-Teach program that some of you may be familiar with. It's now at the University of West Georgia and at Columbus State that recruits STEM teachers into the classroom. EdQuest found that recommends a need for continued professional development and support. Very striking data point from EdQuest, 44% of Georgia teachers leave the field in the first 5 years on the job. We lose nearly half our teachers within 5 years of their starting those jobs. Would we tolerate this high of an attrition rate in other fields? Probably not. So this requires more work and support for new teachers and continued training, especially in districts that may not be able to provide it on their own. The next slide is more about this, and it gets into teacher pay It's still an issue, especially in some places. From EdQuest, Georgia has the 28th highest starting salary for teachers, about $33,400. EdQuest recommends that Georgia increase the base salary for teachers and develop an alternative compensation model that's not just based on years on the job, but on accomplishments, teachers' accomplishments. EdQuest also calls for the state to ensure greater access for students to quality teachers and to make this a more serious priority. Who gets the experienced versus inexperienced teachers in our state? Well, EdQuest found that Georgia schools with high rates of minority enrollment have nearly 3 times the rate of first-year teachers as schools with low rates of minority enrollment. So that means in some cases, our most underprivileged students have the least experienced teachers. So beyond educators, which was the first main priority in accelerating the pace, is number 2, and that's providing new types of support for today's students. You know, if we have the goal of college or career training, some type of post-secondary learning for every high school graduate, a lot of students need more academic support. A majority of today's students, as you know, come from low-income families. That's a large majority in Georgia. Our demographics are changing. But in addition to academic needs, some of the barriers that students face are non-academic. EdQuest tells us that nearly half of Georgia counties have no licensed psychologist. So we've heard stories of a superintendent or principal needing to address serious mental health issues with a student, and the nearest professional who can help them is 100 miles away. What kind of hope does a family with limited transportation have for that? So how do we provide better support for students and wraparound services, those sorts of things? Well, this is one of the solutions we highlight in the report. We spotlight Marietta High School Student Success Center, which many of you know about. And Marietta High, they surveyed their students intensively to find out what they wanted. And they imagined that they would get answers back like, we need extra tutoring after school. And of course, there were answers like that. But to the school's surprise, students were very specific about what they needed. Genesis is nodding her head. She's going to talk about this in her panel. The college-going workshops, mental health counseling, help with finding parents a job, English language classes for their families, and substantial numbers of students, and I'm talking hundreds in some cases, wanted support groups for suicide prevention for themselves or somebody they knew, grief counseling, or groups, support groups for issues like cutting. EdQuest also found that more than a third of Georgia counties have no licensed social worker and calls for better interventions for homeless and foster kids, which would lessen the burden for schools to deal with those students' needs. The third main topic in accelerating the pace, building a stronger transition from high school to college and career. In this day and age, it seems ridiculous for a student not to have a seamless path into some type of post-secondary after graduation. But we worked with a Student Voices group in Kentucky, and they reported through interviews across the state that many kids responded to their question about what are you going to do after high school with, I don't know. Some encouraging news from Georgia on that front, though. Dual enrollment, 51% of Georgia high school graduates now finished with some type of career certification. That's pretty remarkable. But on a discouraging note, only 63% of Georgia students enrolled in college for 2 years, after 2 years, were still in college or had earned a 2-year degree or some kind of credential. Also, Georgia, according to EdQuest, Georgia needs more need-based aid, which many of you know. HOPE is a merit-based scholarship, and that's a whole other issue. The fourth and final topic in accelerating the pace is having the resources necessary to meet these goals. EdQuest tells us that 28 states add per-student support for schools for each low-income student. Georgia does not. Georgia does, however, for English language learners. There's a 34% difference, a funding gap, in student spending from the highest funded district to the lowest funded district in Georgia. So inequities are easily apparent in our state. Georgia ranked 35th in per student spending in 2014, about $9,400 per student, and got a D+ rating in our school funding system from Education Week, ranking us behind our neighboring states of South Carolina and Alabama. So EdQuest found that the last time Georgia truly overhauled its school funding system was decades ago. The governor had a school funding commission that made good recommendations, but there's been no action yet. EdQuest recommends that, imagine this, we actually determine how much it'll cost to provide today's students with the education they need, and then base the new formula on that. Let's be clear, we still don't know what it costs to educate Georgia children at an optimal level. So, our key takeaways from Accelerating the Pace: most of us agree that educational opportunities are uneven across Georgia and in all of our southern states, and that goes for all political views and backgrounds. Most of us recognize the urgent need to do something about it. It'll help our economy and our quality of life. There's actually consensus on broad issues on which to focus. The Georgia Partnership thinks we can raise the bar for quality and also even the playing field for all students. And most of all, this tells us we can let our state's future and our children's future bring us together. Education is too serious for us not to have meaningful, healthy discussion about the most important issues. But fortunately, that's our purpose here today. So I'm going to ask Robert Gaines from the Georgia Partnership to come up and tell you how you can weigh in on some of the issues. And then I'm going to ask our candidates, Mr. Woods and Mr. Turner, to come on up, as well as our panelists. Make your way to the stage, and we'll get started with our panel discussion here in just a minute. So thanks.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here with us. We wanted to take an opportunity to hear from you today. So if you haven't already referenced the instructions on your table, I'm going to walk you through the process. So first and foremost, if you have a cell phone, you can take that out. Okay. Oh, some people have beat me to the poll. That is all right. That's good. People were eager. So first, open up your text messaging app. If you have an iPhone, Android, it all works pretty much the same. And when you get there in the to line where you would send it to a phone number, type in 22333. That's 22333. And in the body of that text message, you'll want to type GA Partnership. So that's step one, and that'll give you access to the poll. So again, the number is 22333, and you'll type GA Partnership. So that's step one. Step two, after you gain access to the poll, is to type one word that best represents where your heart and your mind are with respect to education. What's the one thing, if you can capture it in a word, that represents where you think Georgia should be going with respect to education? And as you do that, as you see, it'll populate. And the biggest word is the word that's most frequently texted, if you haven't done this before. So you'll see it changes, and in a minute or so, we'll get an idea of what is the biggest issue that we in the room believe Georgia should be thinking about. Thank you.
Give you just another second to populate the word cloud, and then we'll move to our panel. I think equity is the big one. Our panelists can't see this, so I'm going to dictate. But equity, funding, preschool, leadership, teachers, wraparound, arts, workforce.
What are you teaching in?
Charters, quality,
What grade? Awesome.
emotional. I think these dovetail well with some of the topics I'm sure on everyone's minds here on our panel. So a reminder to the audience, in a few minutes after we finish our discussion, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions of the candidates for state superintendent. Also, more detailed bios for everyone up here on stage are in your packets. But I'm just going to give some brief introductions. First, our panelists who will be asking questions of the state superintendent candidates. And this goes from left to right, your left to right. Dr. Duke Bradley III, our principal at Banneker High School here in Fulton County. He was the 2018 County Principal of the Year, and we know there are a lot of improvements going on at Banneker, so it's great to have you, Dr. Bradley. Next, we have Genesis Castro, who sort of fills our student role, even though she's now a graduate of the University of Georgia. She went to Peachtree Ridge High School in Gwinnett County, and she's also a grad student around the corner at Georgia State, and she's the Director of Education at HOPE, the Hispanic organization promoting education. And then I'll skip over to Chris Clark, who's the president and CEO of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. He represents, of course, the business community statewide. The Chamber has a tremendous commitment to education, so thanks for being here, Chris.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And finally, Allison Townsend, who was our 2019 Georgia Teacher of the Year. She's about to spend the entire year traveling the state, and she's taught in Fulton County at Shake-Rag and Barnwell Elementary Schools. So thanks for being here, Allison. Now I'm going to introduce two fellows you probably know, but in case you don't, these are the candidates for State Superintendent of Education. First, of course, we have the incumbent State Superintendent of Education, Richard Woods, who's a Republican, former teacher and school administrator. Thanks for coming, Mr. Woods. And we have his opponent, Otha Thornton, who I mispronounced your name a moment ago. Sorry about that. He's the Democratic Party nominee, retired military officer, and former president of the National PTA. Welcome, Mr. Woods. So, Mr. Woods, Mr. Thornton, each of our panelists will have 2 questions each for you. But I'll get us started with our opening question, and you'll have 2 minutes, please, if you will, to respond to this question. And it's a really broad question that you can answer however you'd like. What's your vision for the future of education in Georgia? And what will you do in the next 4 years to help make it happen? And we'll start with you, Mr. Woods.
Well, again, coming into office a little over 3.5 years ago, where we were in Georgia is that we talked about tests, we talked about accountability. But the reason I ran is because we did not talk about children. Children continues to be the number one thing we talk about at the Department of Education. It is what we begin each and every day. We lived in a time in which all we did was, again, look at accountability. But our most important thing as educators is building relationships. That's what we do. And I think by doing so, we expand the opportunities in schools. One of the things we looked at was reducing testing, which we had the largest reduction of testing in our state's history. We reduced the number of mandated observations that both teachers and administrators had to deal with, just so we could allow them to do what they need to do, and that's dealing with our kids. We've expanded opportunities for many years. We in Georgia said that every child had to go to a 4-year university. Worst thing we ever did. We need to make sure that our kids have opportunities, technical schools, military, universities, and so we've done that. Expanding opportunities in STEM across the state, giving our kids things in which it's more than just being able to take a test. The fine arts is extremely important. Giving our kids time to come out and play. Those are things that we're looking at. Our mission at the Department of Education, and what I've shared with the staff, is that we are getting our kids ready for life. Not a test, but getting them ready for life. And we've exceeded that, and we continue to look at that. Again, if you go back, 3.5 years ago, what I inherited and where we have moved, we've moved a great distance. And that's because we've been working with you in partnership throughout the state. And that's another thing we've done throughout the state. For us in the Department of Education, we were an island of silos, but no more. We are here to serve and support what goes on in education. And so that's what we're going to continue to do, to build upon the success, but expand the opportunities and make sure we focus on our children each day.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Thornton.
Well, it's wonderful to be here today. I'm Otha Thornton.
The big three things I want to do as far as Georgia's concerned in addressing our issues is, first of all, wraparound services. 30% of our children in Georgia experience poverty, and it impacts not only their families, but classrooms and our school systems. And some of you are familiar with Maslow, where you have to meet the basic needs of the child. First, the basic needs, then the psychological needs, and then leads to the self-fulfillment and self-actualization. So you have to really intimately understand that when you're trying to apply things to the system in educating our children. Also along with that, if we look at school safety, that's a critical piece. If you meet the basic needs of children, you can help reduce some of the challenges that we're having. Wraparound services include psychological services, it includes social services, and that's critical as we move forward. And the third area is that of funding. And we talk about workforce development. I mean, I'm working already with Mr. Richard Keatley, who is the candidate for the nominee for the labor force management. I've actually had experience in working with school districts and linking them up with the chambers of commerce and businesses to make a difference. And 25% of Georgians have a bachelor's degree. So I always said, where are the others? So I mean, we have to look at programs that we have in Georgia, like Coweta County, the German apprenticeship program, which I actually lived in Germany and saw how great that program was and can help expand those things around Georgia. Also, I've worked in the IT industry, which I am now. I've worked in the transportation industry and major industries in Georgia, which I can make a big bridge in the workforce development piece.
Okay, thank you so much. So now we're going to have our panelist questions. I think Duke's ready to go. Duke Bradley.
There is no question that I assume that you agree that teachers, like my colleague Allison and others, school leaders and the like, have the most direct and measurable impact on student achievement. What steps can you take or have you taken to improve educator quality in the state of Georgia? Both.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Thornton, you can go first on this one.
Okay, first of all, the principal, when you talk about school systems, is most important as far as creating the environment and working on getting the resources so when we come to the building, people are comfortable, they feel safe, and just that positive environment. And the teachers are the front line. You have to ensure that as a principals provide the resources so the teachers can do their job. I don't believe in micromanagement or extensively managing teachers. You let them know what they need to do and let them do their job. Qualifications are important, ensuring that they have their proper certifications. Professional development is very important. And I think especially leadership training is very important, and additional training for teachers, and hopefully systems paying for that education. A lot of people don't know this, but the United States military is the most highly educated workforce. At every stage in your military career, education is encouraged, and you can only go so far with education. You have to continue to continuously take military education courses, including masters, PhDs, to move into the highest levels. So again, qualifications and also leadership training and giving them the opportunity to do their jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Woods.
Again, as a former administrator, as a former teacher, I see those things through these eyes, and I know the importance. What we've been able to accomplish again in a relatively short time at the Department of Education. We've taken back the requirement, the onus requirement of really having every teacher having to have the same number of observations. A very big burden upon administration as well, where it became more of a checklist, to be honest. Also with that, we've seen a large reduction of testing. Again, let's focus on giving our teachers time to teach, doing the things that are most essential. We look at our teacher resources, providing them, resources that help them navigate the classroom, whether they're an experienced teacher or a new teacher. Those are things that we are revamping and providing them with services. Making sure that not only our students are safe, but our teachers are safe. That's a whole broad thing. But I want to assure people that as someone who had to deal with, the disaster plan, we've always had that in place. But I think it is trying to make sure that people know what's going on. So we're going to, continue our commitment to make sure that we are giving them some resources and supporting them, but allowing them to build those relationships with their children.
Our next question is from Genesis Castro.
Good afternoon. I've had the pleasure of working with students from many different counties in Georgia, including Cobb County, Gwinnett County, and Hall County. And it's no secret that within the past 20 years, the demographics of Georgia have changed dramatically. Many students come from immigrant families, and they don't know how to navigate the education system. They're not familiar with it. They don't know how to navigate the process to apply to college. So as superintendent, how would you support school districts in supporting students with these backgrounds?
Well, again, one of the things we've already started, we have something called a continuous needs assessment. And again, that allows the local districts to really look at their unique populations. As demographic changes, then they, prioritize what they need to do to address, different needs, because all systems are different. So again, we don't want to just, put somebody in the same box. But as we continue to build that, we're looking at, putting our resources at the DOE on the front side so that everyone can benefit, from those resources. Again, expanding our options and supporting our counselors. Again, that's the first line that many people who have issues or as they come into, that's the person they're going to deal with. So we're looking at how do we expand those opportunities. Again, working with business and industry, we have something called our Counselor Companion and our Career Pipeline. And so this will allow parents and students to navigate and look, what does it take for me to move to the next step? Where are those things that we can, use those resources out there to support, our young people as they come in. But again, this is something we hope to invite everyone into the fold and say, is it something you can do a little bit better than us, but we can navigate and point you to that direction.
I would say in Georgia, our audio doesn't match our video. We talk about the demographics, but by 2040, 2045, the majority of Georgia will be black and brown. And what's happening in reverse is we're having policy, and I'm really nonpartisan. We start talking about policy. What is good policy for our state? So when we spend $60 million a year for student scholarship organizations, and then we're going up to $100 million, that's taking money out of the public schools. And if we've had 16 years of austerity cuts, that's 16 years of impact on our students. So now this year, it's an election year, so they're giving $167 million extra dollars to fund some of these things. And then you talk about migrant services. What are we doing there? As a state school superintendent, those are the things we need to look at to address as we move forward.
Our next question is from Chris Clark.
Guys, both, first, thank y'all for running. Thanks for agreeing to serve. That's very, very important. We appreciate that. The number one issue on the poll that Alan mentioned earlier were job creation and the economy. Economic development has changed a lot in the last few years. It's no longer about location, location, location. It's about talent, talent, talent. As I go around the state, the three things that I hear from business leaders the most are, one, I can't find the talent, can't find the kids to hire that I want. Many communities, the companies feel like there's a disconnect between their local school system and the jobs that they're creating that they have open. And the third thing that I hear is they're very appreciative of the advancements that we've made and the progress that we've made, but their world is changing so quick, the skill sets of their workers are changing so quick, they're afraid that we're going to get left behind. So you two want to control the pipeline. My guys are at the end of the pipeline. Tell me, how do you address those? What message would you have me take back to those business leaders around the state?
Mr. Thornton's first this time.
Okay, with economic development, so I have extensive experience in that. In Maryland, Anne Arundel County school system, I worked on a panel with the school superintendent, the military, and Chamber of Commerce. Mm-hmm. We had 10 high schools. We surveyed the communities around the high schools, see what their needs were, and we established particular industry areas for the high schools. My particular high school was Homeland Defense. So we connected with the National Security Agency, which we have the Army Cyber Command coming here in 2020. Mm-hmm. That's a big industry. We can become the Silicon Valley of the East here if we do it right.
Right.
So basically what we did, we connected with those businesses We were able to bring professionals in the classroom. We worked with the State Department of Education there in Maryland, and we were able to get it where the curriculum and standards were developed and pretty much approved at district level. So our kids came out of the schools with experience and rolled right into the industry. So in Georgia, that's one of the models that I would like. Now in Georgia, I've been down to the Golden Isles Career Academy in Brunswick. They're very well connected with the technical school and the industry in that area. I would also look at, I mentioned about the different industries I worked in. I worked for Delta Airlines for 3 years. So I would be inclined to go talk to the Delta president and say, hey, can we look at putting some aviation programs in some of our rural high schools, for a few $1 million to help feed that pipeline, the largest employer. Or I'm with the General Dynamics IT, working in that industry to bring more people into the pipeline. So there are a lot of, I have extensive experience, and like I said again, the current labor commission that's running now, we will work very closely in ensuring that we provided a great, basically, career pipeline out of the high schools, and you got the necessary skills to do well.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Mr. Woods.
But again, I go back to, I think, where we were 3.5 years ago. You didn't hear that. That was not the conversation we were talking about. But as we move forward, this is what we've done in the Department of Education thus far. And we have, to my knowledge, the only embedded economic development liaison inside the Department of Education. So that was something that was very important to me, to have that relationship with business, to say we want something more than that relationship of just being, a source of resources and money and things, which has been typically in the past. But as we continue to expand that, and we appreciate working with the chamber, we have, a SEALS program, which again, as students acquire those SEALs, it lets them know that the business, they are career ready. And that's something that we work together with business and industry as we talk and say, what do you need? Not saying in our perception, but having that in the part. We now have, economic development, districts across the state. Again, we're getting ready to roll. I think we'll have 5 out there. But part of the thing is that this encourages our local districts to work with business and industry, one-on-one. So they are having conversations across the board of what that looks like. We also have business and industry work with our CTA, our career program, in which they sat down and they helped develop our strategic plan for that. Now, this group of business and industry leaders, we didn't say we want to just throw you away right now, but they're going to become part of our advisory group. So we're not, letting business just fall beside, but they've got to become, because what in the past, what our CTA program became was Grandpa's old shop class. We have to make sure that what we do and move forward, that it always remains relevant. And I think those are conversations that we are having throughout the state. We're attracting business, we're inviting them, and we are very responsive. Some of the things you look at, the new pathways and courses, whether it's dealing with Pinewood Studios, mining industry, those are things that we are looking at them and say, what do you need? And we will make those courses happen.
Allison Townsend.
Good afternoon. I think we can all agree that keeping effective teachers in our classrooms has real benefits for our students. Yet teacher turnover is a huge problem for us and for everyone nationally. We just talked about how nearly half of our teachers are leaving the profession within 5 years. So how will you lead the department to help improve teacher retention?
Well, I think as I came into the office, we had a survey, about the first that I know of, in which we polled teachers. We had over 50,000 educators, respond to us. And so we've got to listen to what our teachers are saying, what our administrators are saying to improve. Now, in doing that, we did respond. We looked at it, so we cut down the testing. That was one of the things we looked at, the largest mandated testing in our state system. We cut down the observations with them. Now, what we've been doing as well is we've been giving them training, whether it's our new standards as we roll out science, social studies, PE. We are supporting those things because a lot of things have been typically just thrown to the past. Fine arts. There was not a single fine arts person at the department in over 20 years. But yet, we put that person in and updated every single standard in that area. So we have to make sure that we maintain a level of commitment to our teachers each and every year. Now, looking at some things that we could possibly do and working with the General Assembly, we have a high demand, field. And I think that as we can offer and say, classify education as the high end in the field, that means they can have that education paid for on the front end. And for a starting teacher, I'll assure you, having that education is extremely important. But on the backside, it is looking at, we're capped at 21 years. Well, that means for the rest of the time we have an education, we have to do that. But my suggestion would be let's expand and perhaps have a couple more step raises at least. And so that gives us a starting point in which we can meet financially the needs on the front and the backside as well.
A couple of things. Number one, properly compensating teachers. I looked at a couple of years ago, I think it was 2014, but they said we're going to give all the teachers a 4% pay raise from within the state budget. And then they came back and said, oh, by the way, you have this 4% pay raise, but we're going to not pay insurance for bus drivers and support staff. So you had the school boards scrambling to figure out how they're going to compensate some of the, I call it power tricks. So we have to really look at that and ensure that we properly compensate our teachers. And there's other things we can do. In some places around the United States, I've seen loan forgiveness for teachers. That's something we can look at. If we can find $1 billion to lure a corporation here, we can find money to offer programs like that to teachers. Housing subsidies, those are something that we can do. Again, if we can find $1 billion and try to bring a company here, we can find perks to keep teachers in the field in Georgia.
So come back down here to Duke. Go ahead, sir.
So at Banneker High School, we have reconciled that our work must extend beyond the provision of quality instruction for our students. That's because many of our young people come to us with needs that negatively impact their classroom performance. On this notion of wraparound services, what specifically can you do to support schools in providing quality wraparound services for all children in both rural and urban settings?
Mr. Thorne.
Okay. Again, this year we received extra $167 million, and I understand for the first time this year, this Department of Education is doing wraparound, putting in more wraparound services to address it based upon funding, and that's a good thing. As far as we move forward, we have to continue to make sure we get that funding. As I mentioned, you have to critically and intimately understand Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If a kid is hungry, if a kid has problems with hearing or vision, and you don't pick that up, that impacts the educational outcomes of that child. And then when you get into the mental needs, psychological needs from coming from traumatic events, or also from the standpoint of belonging. Do they belong? Do they feel like they belong in the school? Do they feel welcome in the school? All those things are very important, which can be provided by wraparound services, additional guidance counselors, additional psychologists, and then just fulfillment. When you meet those basic needs and psychological needs, you will get that great student outcomes that we need to excel.
Well, for us as a department, it's been an exciting time. One of the things we started actually a couple of years ago was our Title I pilot. And that allows us at the local level to expand the use of how we use our federal funds. And by doing so and not pigeonhole that, you can now use those to meet the needs of students, whether it's academically, social, emotional, wraparound service. So it gives more flexibility. This year alone, we'll be looking at giving $1 million to mental health. Again, one of the things we have continuously tried to stress. Also, looking at the positive environment of students. And again, in school safety, those are some things that we continue to give and look at money as well in providing our services there. Wraparound services, again, one of the things we have this year is that we'll be providing a coordinator. So we've looked at the Marietta model and trying to expand that opportunity. Not necessarily we're going to duplicate it, but expand that opportunity throughout the state and see what we're looking at. One of the things I think I go back to is giving our time, for teachers to build relationships. Relationships are what we're about. They're students, they're kids, they're not numbers or digits, but that's where we're going to make the biggest difference. And I think as we do that, we continue to meet needs, whether it's academic, whether it's social emotional, whether it's just basic necessity. And I think one of the things we look at is we're talking with the USDA to see how can we perhaps use some of the food that necessarily goes to waste Now we can provide that, to the homes as well. So it's a very comprehensive plan, but a lot of great things are moving in this area, which is very pleasing to see.
Genesis, you have the next question.
So, in light of the recent school shootings, safety is definitely a priority for many of Georgia's families. The House and Senate will have committees to have looked at this issue and made recommendations. As superintendent, how would you ensure that school safety is a priority?
Well, again, for an individual who has worked with disaster and school safety plans, I mean, that's something that I used to do in Irwin County. And so, again, I reassure people, safety is not something we have ever put on the back burner. As crises come up, it rises, but that's something we have continuously looked at. Now, I think today's time has created a different environment. And so, yes, we are looking at extending some things. Because I'll be honest, when I was a teacher, we had more guns out in my student parking lot than our police did, okay? We never thought anything about it. But because of that, we look at trying to be comprehensive, that yes, we have to harden our schools. One of the things we look at, of course, we work with the General Assembly. We have $16 million. We have bond money that's coming out and distributed to help, harden those facilities. We continue to work with the federal government to see as they can produce, things. GEMA is working with our local school districts as well to make sure that we are communicating. So we do have a high level of communication, looking at what is response time. But also in conjunction to that, we're looking at what are the wraparound services that we need. Are we committing ourselves? We're trying to, looking at expanding our services with both mental health, our positive school environment. Those are things that which are, require us to expand the opportunities. And so as we begin to move, you will see, things look at, we will harden it, but we've got to look at the backside, and that's meeting some of these needs that, move those kids to perhaps committing something that, is very unspeakable.
I'll be very succinct with that. State school superintendent, the role I can play in that is in the budget process, basically doing a study, a timely study, saying how much do we need, what do we need. And from working at the national level, I can pull in resources that I've worked with around the country, like the Children's Safety Network, programs like Rachel's Challenge that addresses school environments and improves the safety and well-being of the classes. But there are a lot of different programs out there. Just pull them in here to Georgia to assist with that, and also the funding.
Thank you. Chris?
So it's interesting. One of the number one issue on the word cloud up there is equity. So I want to put on my parent hat for a minute, if I can. So I spend a lot of time in schools, and I see the inequity that's out there from a funding standpoint. I've been in some rural communities lately where the only access a kid has to computers or to the internet is if he gets lucky enough to get on the cycle to get the elective for computer class. And then I go into my son's school, Booth Middle School in Peachtree City, and every kid has a laptop that they get to take home every day. I'm curious about what you guys would do to change the funding formula to give flexibility to address these changing needs that the students have and that our administrators and teachers need and have.
Well, a lot of people, they take snapshot or microwave looks at problems.
Mm-hmm.
So in Georgia, when you talk about equity, you really have to go back to 1870 when the department started. It started black and white. And then as you move to 1954, Brown versus Board, Georgia said, we're not going to comply. 1956, they passed laws that Governor Griffin at the time said, not only will we not comply, but we will make every public school private in Georgia before we integrate it. So if we look today, fast forward to 2018, we have a situation where we're giving $100 million to private schools that we don't have to account for. And so when you talk about equity, we're taking money out of public schools with legal public policy managed by the Georgia Department of Education. And this is not under Mr. Woods, this is over a long period of time. So we have $100 million next year. So until we can, with our legislators and people of Georgia, have the will to take some of these funds back, we will not address equity. But through the budget, through equity, through looking at areas and saying this area needs additional 20 million or whatever, we will have to put a task force together to look into that and determine how we can get more monies to those rural areas working with corporations also to bring in resources. Take Savannah, Georgia. That southeast corridor, you have the Georgia ports. How can we work with the Georgia ports to bring in more funds into those areas? How can we work with Delta Airlines to bring in more, resources? Delta gives about $30 million a year. They're very responsible as a corporation. So you really got corporations to step up to make a difference here where the public taxes and funding doesn't cover that for equity.
Again, looking at the funding formula, again, that was something I've been well versed with since I was in education in 1988 and moving forward. As we look at that, I'm very appreciative that we have fully funded education for the first time that I can remember in my life. But what we still have is we have a 1985 formula. It does not match what a 2018 funding of school looks like. And so we need to really address that. We need to have a very prioritized, but a very flexible system. One of the things I think that we have looked at that I'm very proud of is the ESSA model that we created to plan for our state. I think that is a model that can be replicated so that educators and our stakeholders can come together and say, this is what we really need within education. And one of the things we look at, and I know we had a group look at education, but myself and the Department of Education really had no part in that. And we have to invite our educators and people that have one-to-one knowledge of what that into the process. And so that's something that we're going to continue to move forward with. But we do have to look at a system that takes into account many different things. And for me in South Georgia, what I look at is that if the price of diesel fuel goes up, that has a big impact. When it went up a few years ago, that was $600,000 that Irwin County had to absorb that the state did not provide. Okay. Again, looking at technology costs. And when I started school, technology for me was a piece of chalk. Okay? But today, it is quite different. Basically, our kids wear technology on their hip. And so we have to have a system, again, that does prioritize and allows us to meet the needs. And I think as we do that, we expand our opportunities, we expand business. I think inviting them into the process. With our STEM and STEAM initiative, one of the requirements we have is that business has to be at the table. Like I said, Georgia and education, this is not just a Department of Education problem. This is a Georgia issue that we all have to come together with.
Now,
As a third grade teacher, I see firsthand how a significant amount of testing can hurt our kids. It takes away time that I can be teaching, and it takes away time that they can be learning. I also hear from colleagues how frustrated they are with the amount of testing. Under your leadership, what can be done to alleviate some of that testing?
Well, I'm glad to say we've done something about that. Again, with Senate Bill 364, we did see the largest reduction of mandated testing across in our state's history. So that was something that, again, listening to teachers that I knew was very important. But as we looked at that, we've been able to reduce some of the redundant testing with milestones. Middle school students who are now taking high school courses don't have to come back and take the milestones middle school test. Again, that's a little bit redundant. For those that are in high, or at least in college, some of the milestones have been taken away, and again, so we're very appreciative of that. As we continue to move forward, one of the things is that we had a group, as we looked at some of the testing, some individuals within the ESSA plan wanted to make first and second grade testing high stakes. Well, we created something called Keenville, and we said we are not going to make that high stakes. It is going to be formative, it's going to be based on our standards, and then provide our teachers with a tool that, again, allows them to address learning needs as they go. We now currently have a testing pilot going on. And by doing so, we're looking at trying to transform and maybe move from what I call the autopsy report to the formative, diagnosis of where we need to move. So we're moving a lot of stones out of the way, and that we really have not had the opportunity in the past. So yes, but we also need, I would say, this help at the local level. Some of the testing that is coming there is typically what is initiated there, but we're not done yet. We plan to come to the General Assembly and again continue to press the point that we want to at least be down to the national level of required tests, and hopefully that will begin to alleviate some of the issues there.
Basically, same here as far as testing. I don't believe in high stakes testing, and assessments and diagnostics. That's great, But as far as high stakes testing, totally against it, and we'll continue to reduce it to the required level. But what we do want to do is ensure that we can compete with the nation and the global, being globally competitive with the testing that we provide here in Georgia.
Thank you all, and I think are we ready to move to our audience questions? Okay, thanks, Diane. So we have Dana and Steve and Diane with microphones. They're making their way, or she's about to make their way through the audience. So raise your hand, tell us who you are, and you'll be asking the candidates questions, and we'll give them both a minute to respond. So let's see, where's our first question? I see a couple of hands up over here. All right.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. My name is Mary Palmer, and I'm a community education advocate, primarily focusing on the Atlanta Public Schools. I'd like to ask the question for the candidates to understand what role do they think that the leadership within the districts, the superintendents, as well as the principals within the school have on the impact of our children's education and getting to the next level of career and college ready.
Let's see, who did we end with? Who went last?
Okay,
Mr. Thorne, you want to go first? Sorry.
So what I usually do before I take a job, what is the job description and the qualifications? I think if you look in Article 8 of the Constitution, it lays it out clearly. And what that is, as a state school superintendent, I will serve as the chief administrator and chief advocate for the state level. So my job is to make sure I get resources and support your school district based upon the Georgia model of your school system having local control. So your voters in Atlanta elected your leaders. So once your leaders come to me, your superintendent and your board, and say, Superintendent Thornton, we need this. It's my job as a state superintendent to try to support your requirements based upon what your leaders are asking for.
Again, if I understood the question, as far as the principal and the relationship even with superintendents at the local level, I firmly believe the school principal is the most important person, bar none, in education. Because whatever level they set as far as their bar, that's what their staff is going to go. That is how important that is. I don't care, you can have a staff full of Michael Jordan, LeBron James, or whatever, but if that principal is calling all the wrong plays, that staff is going to look really amateurish. And so we have to make sure that that's the relationship that we fully support, because that's where we're going to make the difference, because they are the team leader, they are the people on the boots on the ground. Now at the local level, and again I look at this even as state school superintendent, if you are a local superintendent, your job is to support and serve those people at the school level. That's where you're going to make the changes, because again, for us at the part level, I mean, we're trying to move services, we're trying to help and provide resources for those folks in need. And I think for our local superintendents as well, the same thing transfers down into that level. And so it is so extremely important. Leadership, bar none, is probably the most important thing that you're talking about, because those people hire and those people make decisions that have an impact and have an impact on the ability of their teachers and individuals to make a difference day in and day out.
We have a question over here.
Yes, I'm Neil Shorthouse. I've heard from a number of people lately who are leaving the teaching profession who said they're not leaving it because of the kids. They love the kids. They love the job of teaching. They're leaving because there's an excessive amount of, they talk about paperwork and just stuff that goes on in the schools. Is this an accurate reason? Is this a widespread problem, or is this not? And if it is, what can the leader of education in Georgia do to keep these people who are really committed to kids but don't want to do the other stuff?
Well, again, I'm used to doing stuff as an educator, so I understand what their problem is and issues. It is a little bit I would say it is an issue. But what is that issue connected to? I think the high stakes testing, again, because what you had is that to be honest, I went and everywhere I went, it was data rooms, it was things, we were data rich. And we know more about a child than they know, again, probably the parents know if it comes to that. But it is being able to properly use that information And so you're just not checking the box and going through it. I think one of the things we looked at was the reduction of mandated observations. Again, basically that was a check in the box initiative. And not giving our individuals, our principals and teachers time to sit down and actually talk and come up with what is the viable solution. As you look at that, for us, even at the Department of Education, we are trying to streamline processes that allow even our districts to do some things, again, such as the continuous needs assessment. As we do that, we brought just our entire department together, and so that they don't have to deal with federal programs or school improvement or nutrition, but it's collectively coming together and saying, this is something we can streamline. And I think as we streamline those processes, then we begin to free up more time. And it is something we look at and we continue to hear. And again, I think that's one of the things, one of the reasons I have a teacher advisory group, so that we can sit down and talk about. And these are things that we talk about all the time, and again, work on solutions for them as well.
Same thing here as far as just streamlining issues. I had the privilege to work in 2 White House administrations, and one of the things we always looked at is efficiency. We were highly efficient. So based upon seeing different management systems and different efficiencies, I would get input from teachers, superintendents, principals, and students and say, what can we do to reduce some of these administrative requirements to free up time for teachers to be able to teach and students to have more instructional time.
We have a question back here.
Hi, my name is Michelle Simpson. I'm a student of a middle school, a parent of a middle school student, and a former governance council member. So Fulton County went to a county-wide charter system, which I thought was really good. It allowed the governance council to be filled with students, teachers, parents, and community members, while still letting the schools take advantage of the economy of scales when it comes to resources and basic business functions like HR, legal, accounting, that really burdens a lot of individual charters. And I want to know what you all thought about a statewide charter system, in which each school has kind of the control of the curriculum is left up to the governance council, which is made up, again, of the students, teachers of that local school, community members, but the schools can still take advantage of the fact that there's an HR department that serves the whole district, so they don't have that individual cost.
Mr. Thornton.
As far as the charter system is concerned, my philosophy about charters, as long as they are accountable to your taxpayers, I'm okay. And if Fulton County determined that this is the system they wanted based upon the folks being elected, then however you run that, that's up to Fulton County and in the charter system. Expanding the statewide. I'm really into local school districts. They attempted that, I think, in 2016 with the Opportunity School District, and I fought against that because, again, it caused a lot of issues and costs a lot of duplication of efforts and money. And we want to be as efficient as possible.
Again, I want to say I think you're the most mature-looking middle school student that I've seen. For clarity, but I think
I need some credit recovery there.
But I would say this: as we look at moving forward, again, local control is what it is. Every school system, again, to your point, can we have a statewide system? In theory, we can have that today. It's just left up to the local school districts to decide whether they want to, become a charter system, what we call our, SWISI or strategic waiver, or perhaps what our traditional model. So that is already in place, and I think it is something we look at. As we move forward, what I encourage with the governance model is that all districts, they need to be listening to their parents. They need to be listening to industry and business and having those advocates there, with a daily dialogue to say, what do we need? That's one of the things we've done at the Department of Education to try to model that. To say that we do have a student, advisory, both middle school and high school. We do have a parent advisory. We do have a special needs advisory. We're looking at business and, and a teacher advisory. So, that dialogue needs to continue to develop. But I think by, giving us that opportunity, we do have it now. But again, it comes down to leadership. You can have any system in place, but if you have poor leadership, again, you can, I've seen it, day one. I've seen great systems, both private, public, homeschool. But it comes down to the investment. So I hope, at that public leadership, I don't really want to see a statewide, because it needs to be local. Because I guarantee you, working up there in the office, I don't get to see, and it's taken me 3 years just to see every single school district, not visit all 2,300 schools. So that's the importance of local control, and and like I said, you can have that right now.
All right, thank you. Dana, we have a question over here, I think. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Demetrius Nelson. I'm an education consultant and teacher trainer. So as we look at more than almost half of teachers leaving the profession, one of the current research shows that one of the reasons is because of classroom management skills or the lack thereof. And so when we look underneath classroom management, there's also teachers lacking the ability to be culturally responsive or respectful or competent. And so what do you feel, what are the actionable steps that you feel that you, as a state school leader, would help to initiate to make sure that school districts are equipping their teachers to be more culturally respectful and responsive?
Well, I think first of all, we need to work with the university system. That's where we get our teachers. Again, they train our teachers. Again, it behooves me that if we're giving diplomas out and people are not trained, there seems to be a disconnect there. But I think that requires us also to have a dialogue, and when we do have a dialogue with the chancellor of really looking at what does training look like? What do our teachers need? Now, as we do so, what I'm looking at and what we're beginning to explore is to really have more of an internship for teachers. Since day one, don't leave them out there alone. I mean, I experienced that firsthand. I was basically given my books and said, Richard, have a good life. Okay? But we need to make sure that we support, especially those first 3 years. Having an internship model that is very similar to perhaps the medical profession or other professions would be great. Having a teacher, a mentor teacher, to take on perhaps 3 individuals within a school and say, listen, let's help develop that. Let's continue that. But again, one of the things we do is that we do offer support, whether it's teaching our standards and again rolling that out. That's something we're providing. We're looking at our school improvement. School improvement is not just for schools in need, but our tiered system says at the very bottom, everyone can improve, and that means providing that internship and that support to our teachers. And I think by putting all those pieces in place, we'll continue to see improvement and longevity with our teachers.
I actually have one of my advisors down at Georgia Southern Dental Teaching College, and I would recommend, back at the sources, cultural competence. Although we live in Georgia, we live in a global economy, and you have to take into effect cultural competence. As our teachers are coming out of the universities, so that will be number one. And then back to leadership, we have to act locally, but think globally. So in teaching our kids and running our systems, we have to make sure that we're actively and intently educating and leading our folks to be culturally competent to handle the matters that we have.
I'm Ethan Beller at Georgia Engage, and I was wondering, what do you feel about expanding funding for online education and more technological and newer forms of education?
Mr. Thornton.
Expanding online education, is that the question? No issues with that. No issue. Again, if you look at the current situation, you may have some kids, particularly in high school, that may have to work to support their families, and they may have another way they need to do it. So online education, and we actually have online education here in Georgia, but I do believe that we really need to hold them accountable and make sure that we have a quality curriculum and ensure that they can meet the standards of academic excellence that we're expecting our graduates to have here in Georgia.
Again, we have Georgia Virtual, again, within the Department of Education, a great online service. So, in fact, what you'll find out is that those students who take that program actually have a pretty high graduation rate. It's actually well above the state average. And as we continue to look at that, of course, we're looking at equity throughout the state. I think one of the things you find out is that many parts where I was at in Southwest Georgia the past few days, we don't have hotspots. We don't have, the accessibility there. So again, I think, some things we can look at. Let's work through our PeachNet system to expand those opportunities. Working with partners at, the public library system, I think that to expand those. For me, again, what does a classroom or a virtual classroom look like? We want to provide our kids with opportunities, that they're not, designated just because of a location. To me, in Southwest Georgia or Southern Georgia or rural area, why can't you have a class of maybe 25 kids? But again, with a class of 25 kids, would have 25 computers, that one kid is taking French, another kid's taking industrial arts, another kid's taking, AP English. Having that accessibility. And again, one of the things we can look at is that where we perhaps can't or don't have, teachers because of funding, maybe we can outsource teachers within some of our larger schools to say, listen, we are going to make you an online professor. And again, expand those opportunities throughout the state. So again, technology allows us to reach the world. I mean, today when I look at, my version of internet technology was a pen pal. Okay, that's how I communicated cases across the world. But because of technology today, it can be instantaneous and it can be, in real time. And so, take advantage of what we have today.
Am I on? I am.
Yes.
John Zoner with the Georgia School Superintendents Association. Thank you for running and submitting yourselves to this kind of critique. It's always a challenge, I know. My question centers around the political arena. Your role in state government or state leadership is critical, but it's extremely critical when it comes to the politics in the state of Georgia. I would like to know from each of you, do you feel like you have a particular skill set that might help you in that political arena? Because as you know, we live in kind of a divisive political environment, and we have polar opposites in a lot of ways, and navigating that can be extremely difficult. But do you have the skill set, or do you have a plan to build that relationship, not only with the governor's office, but also the state legislature and their leadership? I'd like to hear that response. But thank you.
Well, I've been here for 3.5 years. Coming into office, one of the things that I heard was basically relationships were just fractured. They were non-existent. That is one thing that I really spent the first year, in office, is building relationships. People ask, can you work with the governor? Yes, we work with the governor. Can you work with General Assembly? Whether it was Senator Tippins or Representative Coleman, who were the heads of both committees on the House and the Senate, yes, we worked with that. We've had a lot of accomplishment. 364, that was an accomplishment by talking with individuals both politically and externally. Looking at ESSA. ESSA, again, we received acclaim for what we did as a state because we invited shareholders throughout the state. And again, in many cases, many of you were involved with that. But I'll be honest, that was a little bit like herding cats, okay? Because you have different thoughts about what education should look like. But we created a plan that was very successful. And as we continue to look at that, day in and day out, it's amazing of the number of bills that were, brought to our attention. Some kind of unusual, some maybe we could have had some work. But I'll conclude with this to show you the relationships that I think we're able to build. And again, this came from Representative Coleman. Representative Coleman told the members of the General Assembly, until you go and have a discussion and get the blessings of the Department of Education, don't bring a bill to my committee. Now that's trust. Okay? That's trust. And that's what it takes. You have to earn in trust and you have to have integrity. And so I think that we've earned that in 3.5 years based on where we were and where we started.
More questions?
Oh, yeah.
I am so sorry. I'm not trying to hurry you. Sorry.
No problem. A couple of things. I'm a highly decorated combat veteran. On a battlefield, you don't care what color someone is, you don't care. You have my back? How can we accomplish the mission? Like I say, I'm a Georgian. My family has been in Georgia since 1793. And with that being said, I love Georgia. I could went anywhere in the world after I retired from the United States Army, but I want to come back to Georgia to make a difference as a Georgian. I've worked with Republicans and Democrats here in Georgia on education policy at national level. I've sat down with Senator Lamar Alexander, George H.W. Bush's Secretary of Education, and over the Senate Education Committee to talk about ESSA. I've sat down with Arnie Duncan. So I've sat down with both parties because what I tell people around the state, children do not have Democrat or Republican behind their name. They're a child. So I want good policy, and I'm willing to do that with Democrats or Republicans to make a difference for our state and to pull us up from 37 and 38th ranking in national rankings. And you do that by working with everyone, and that's where we are. I don't have permanent friends or permanent enemies when it comes to education. I have permanent interests. That permanent interest is ensure that our children get a great education and can do great things with their life.
Melanie Couchman, we're community advocates for public education. I look at the words up here and I hear what you're all saying, and it seems like we're kind of dancing around one of the main problems of education, and that is affordable housing. Because without affordable housing, we have poverty and we have a lack of equity. And I'm wondering, as state superintendent, what can each of you do to bridge the gap and improve the awareness in the legislature, in the state economic development areas, and in other areas so that we can all pull together so that we're all working on the same problem? Because if we don't stabilize housing, we can't improve education.
As I mentioned earlier about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at one school that I worked in, we had 2,000 students, and we identified we had 30 homeless students. So as far as the school system is concerned, anything and everything we could do, we did. We provided. Also, under the Obama administration, they had a program called Promise Neighborhoods, and they created opportunities to help parents find housing and resources to make a difference. So again, as a state school superintendent specifically, it's just a matter of being an advocate for children that are homeless or having issues in that particular area. But again, I want to work cross-agency to identify and keep that in the forefront as basic needs before a child can be educated.
Well, again, I think that if you have affordable housing, if it's just a home for affordable housing, you move nowhere. In other words, you just have, poverty that are there. So I think you have to look at past that. What are the opportunities that you give people to succeed? Again, for education, we're looking at how do we lift up our young people. Again, I think providing them the wraparound services. And wraparound services aren't necessarily just for our students, but it can extend out to our parents, providing them resources. One of the things I look at that our parents need to be doing each and every day is reading to their kids. That's something that is very important. I think, having a linkage to our different agencies, and we work with different agencies across, whether it's DFACS, Family Human Resources, again, even this morning having a group where we talk about behavioral health. These are all groups and entities that we collaborate with across the state. And, and I think it is seeing that, what we're looking at, what is our mission in Georgia? And I think it is aligning, having a common purpose, having a common group, which we continue to do. And I think that even as we look at, paying attention to rural development, which I'm glad. Rural Georgia has been ignored for years. And again, of course, you find out that's one of the, the driest areas and the highest poverty areas that we have. And so what is the pathways? Again, not just saying that we have one outlet, but how do we expand those opportunities to give them? I'd love to say that one day in Georgia we have no affordable housing. That's because everybody can afford a house. I mean, that should be our goal.
Do we have time for more questions? Let's see.
Sylvia Hooker, Center for Transformational Teaching and Learning. My concern is recruitment and retention of highly qualified, highly effective teachers in rural areas. That is a problem in Georgia. And when I think about your role and what you had mentioned about working with workforce development, what would you do to assist those school districts, superintendents, whoever, to bring industry into those areas so that people would come and would remain there and not go to other particular areas where they do see where there is some kind of way that they can really promote what they do as leaders, teachers, and students.
Well, again, as we look at that, I think we're taking those steps. We actually have economic development school districts now, which require local districts and communities and business to partner with CHIP. So, and again, one of the things we look at is that this is taking place in the rural area. As we look at what economic development looks like, we do have an embedded economic development liaison, and that's putting business and industry. One of the things I've talked with our CTA program is looking at is that you really have within our states, especially within our state, and especially within some of the rural districts, that our schools have great community, or cottage industries that are there. They can become a hub for what takes place, and again, looking at economic growth. One of the things I think is making sure that we are aligned with, the state. I think for me, as I looked at, say, the port in Savannah, I mean, running across the southern part of the state is 82. Okay, 82, if you begin to say that we need to put some hubs out there, that will begin to open up some economic prosperity, because if you have those hubs, then that ripples out into other parts of the state. And again, going back to what we talked about, giving and providing high-speed internet to each and every location, that's something we need. And again, putting a focus on providing airports that can provide, access to some of these corporate jets. And so we need to be thinking collectively of what we can do. And so we're seeing that. And again, for us in the Department of Education, we're doing our part in reaching out and meeting the needs of what locals are saying. I mean, we are talking daily with business and industry as we never have before.
Ma'am, I need you to restate the question. Okay. So the first way is it will be legislative from the standpoint of what incentives do we want to offer in rural development, in the systems, additional funding to attract teachers there. Georgia has a pretty attractive retirement system. But again, it's just getting the teachers in there as far as recruiting them and then providing those resources. Now, I'm going to go back to something that I will make a model here is with this Army Cyber Center. I was talking to Superintendent in Baldwin County last fall, and I said, have you actually spoken with Fort Gordon and what's going on there? And she said, not really. I said, okay, well, we have Troops to Teachers and programs that recruit teachers now, like military folks that can teach cyber classes in the school system. In Columbia County, I know they have one guy teaching cyber courses. But again, this is the future. I work in this industry, and we can attract teachers, from the cottage industries and other subsidiary, job markets by them, getting recruiting teachers there. So we could, if a teacher is passionate about something like the military guys that come out of the cyber world, they will go there happily and teach and build a great workforce that can leave Baldwin County or other counties and go to Fort Gordon, Georgia, or other places in the world that have cyber companies and units.
Before our next question, I was just reminded that questions can be asked of all the panel members, and if anybody wants to make a comment about the issues on the table, you're certainly welcome to do that. I don't know if anybody wants to say anything about rural teachers and that sort of thing. But let's go to our next question, and thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm one of the guinea pigs from the first class of the Education Policy Fellows, and I'm happy to be here to see alumni up on the stage. That was 10 years ago. But 4 years ago, I was asked to serve on the Governor's Arts Learning Task Force. We visited schools around Georgia to emphasize the arts. 2 years ago, this forum actually focused on the arts. It was at the Georgia Film Academy. I have not heard any reference to arts. I don't see it up here, and yet we have a booming arts industry in Georgia. Kids love music, they love dance, they love filmmaking, video. Why is it that this issue doesn't get the attention that it deserves? And as you know, anybody on the panel, I appreciate your thoughts to help us.
Well, I'm a big fan of arts in schools. I mean, it helps. When I think about education, to truly educate a person, character, I think, is an important element. Critical thinking, creativity, and compassion. And in that creativity piece, I mean, I think about all the jobs I've had during my lifetime and the importance of art. Graphic presentations and representations, very important. I've been all over the world. Paris, the Louvre Museum. I mean, and art is just so important, and it's a creativity. So I'm a big proponent. As a national PTA president, I travel all around the country and the world pushing the Reflections program, which covered an entire array of arts. And the last thing here with the Georgia Film Academy, I've actually attended a session out there to see what they're doing for Georgia, and I'll continue to push that to make a difference. I think we produced more films than Hollywood last year in Georgia. So we continue to push that industry and the arts here in Georgia.
Well, again, Mr. Hudson was my art teacher. Okay, I cannot tell you enough about his impact on me and my business and just my teaching as well. When I came into the office, we had no representation of fine arts at the Department of Education. In fact, it had been 20 years since we had that. We have Jessica Booth, who is doing a fantastic job. We had standards, I think, that have predated me as a teacher. And that's pretty sad. But we can say that all those standards have been updated. I've received a statewide and I've received a national award for my commitment to the arts. And again, as we look at that, and again, this is something that opens up possibilities for all kids. Band, music, dance, drama, I cannot say enough about that. It opens up the possibilities of just academic performance. We know, what we look at. But for us, it is making that commitment. In fact, just recently we brought in Pinewood Studios and others to create a new pathway for, screenwriting, something we did not have. But now it's something that we were told that we needed if we wanted to continue to grow, the film industry in Georgia. So yes, fine arts is something that I am just all in on. And it's something that, I think for us, as we look, and I think you look at any civilization, you look at their commitment to the fine arts, and you will find that, especially if it's very high, a very healthy civilization. But if you have something in history that is very clear, that if they ignore the fine arts, you have a civilization that is dying.
If we don't have if we don't have any other questions. Oh, we do have one more. Okay. This is our last question, unfortunately. Dana?
I'll apologize because it's not exactly a question, it's a request. I'm Julia Bernath, Fulton County Board of Education, and this is a request as an individual private citizen. I'm also an Education Policy Fellow, graduate as well. Have to plug that. This has been a great afternoon. Wonderful questions, wonderful dialogue, great answers from the candidates. I would charge each of you to maintain this level of integrity as we go into the political season, because I think we're all wanting to hear the issues and not so much mudslinging. I think it's been very enlightening. I'm very impressed with both of you. And as another elected official, thank you for putting yourself out there because you're opening yourself up to big cans of worms that I hope we can keep under control during the coming session. So can you give me your pledge? You'll do your best to do that.
Well, ma'am, I survived the Democratic primary runoff by sticking to issues. And as I'm traveling around Georgia, I stick to issues. And as a military officer, integrity is critical. And again, I will do my best to do the right thing by Georgia first.
Again, for myself, it's always been about the children. Yeah, that is what my world is about. When you go up to my office, you get off the elevator, you see 2 desks. Those 2 desks came from my classroom. And that keeps the focus on day in and day out of what I need to be focused on. The politics, I mean, people ask me, so what's the hardest part of the job? I say, it's the politics. I mean, if it were just about kids and education, this would be probably the easiest and most enjoyable job in the world. But the focus is on the kids. And I think for myself, again, being the incumbent, I let the record speak. I'm very proud of the record we have achieved in a very short period of time. We've seen education grow. We've seen education succeed. There's a dialogue. I mean, last year when I went and visited schools, every single school I went into, I'd always ask, how's your year? How's things going? Without exception, the best year we've ever had. Okay. And I like to think that's a reflection of our policy, providing them input and support. And again, what you'll see is that ripple will take place. I mean, it started with us at the Department of Education and getting our ship right. And it's moving into the local districts, and I think you will hear that, and it's going to move out into the communities. Georgia's on the move, and like I said, we need to keep our focus on that and not be, distracted by, political, innuendos or whatever goes on. Okay.
Well, thanks for the thoughtful discussion from our candidates and also from our panelists for asking such thoughtful questions. Let's give them a round of applause. Yeah. Thank you all so much, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mike Donnelly to close us out.
So 3 things real quick. First of all, thanks again to our panelists and to the audience for your amazing participation. This could have gone on all night as a really, really great way to spend an afternoon. The second thing is if you've got a parking ticket, at the registration table, if you get it stamped, you'll get a discounted parking. Okay, so we'll save you some money. The third thing is I've got a great way for you to invest some money. And that is on your tables, there's an envelope that may be pushed towards the middle, but I've got long arms. I'm happy to help you get it if you need. But it's to help support the partnership and all of the work that we do. If you don't get that envelope, gpee.org, you can go on there and donate, again, to support the great work that the partnership does. Thanks, everybody, for being here today. Have a great trip home. Thanks.